The first to go missing was Micah.
I need to get an officer out to my house. There's a woman that will not stop coming in my house.
When two friends go missing back to back and in between their disappearances, a third friend is murdered, their mothers begin their own investigation. As the connections between the three cases are explored, the mothers navigate devastating twists and turns, including one revelation that shakes the community to its core. That's the synopsis for the latest Casefile Presents true crime podcast I had pleasure to work on. Casefile Presents partnered with a crime journalist, Olivia Lavois, who's been investigating this case for over 5 years and had unprecedented access to the people involved. When she pitched the story, we knew we had to do it. And it was one of the most rewarding, but at the same time challenging projects I participated in. I was responsible for the overall sound production, mix and music composition. And in this video, I want to show you the process of creating the Bakersfield 3 podcast from my perspective. Now let's start with the idea and the scripts. As I mentioned before, Olivia has been investigating this story for years. She's built relationships with people involved and had many recorded interviews we could use. Now, it's one of the most convoluted stories we have ever done, and we knew the podcast would be long. In the beginning, it was supposed to be like 10 episodes, then 14, and in the end, we had 15 episodes. Now, Olivia and Casey, the anonymous host of Casefile, worked on the scripts outlining the narrative. Olivia would narrate the episodes and weave the recorded clips as the story unfolds. The scripts went through many rewrites, which affected the production stage, so let's talk about it now. Ideally, the process of podcast production is this. Scripting is done, and then we transcribe and cut the interviews and record the narration in the studio. We put it together for a rough draft 1, and after initial round of notes, we score and mix the episodes, plus do the pickups. Job done, right? Unfortunately, that's rarely the case, and in this instance, the workflow went entirely out of the window. Anthony, our editor, put together the initial episodes. The scripts were finished and Olivia recorded the narration in the studio. They had a listen, they did the notes, Anthony fixed the notes and sent the sessions my way. Now, in the meantime, I was finishing the score, and once I got the episodes, I did my pacing cut, which is the first thing I always do, and then I got to scoring them. I exported each episode as draft 2, which was a rough mix with the music. There was still some stuff missing, but the overall sound was prepped. However, at this point, a few things happened, and we had to extend the series by a couple of extra episodes. Now, to do so, we also had to do quite substantial rewrites, plus there were already significant changes in the narration and notes. A lot of notes. There were two main challenges. One was that Olivia was still rewriting the show, but it would be impractical to go to the studio each time, so we decided that she would record a placeholder narration and pickups at home, which I will then use, and only after everything is signed off, she would pop down to the studio, record it properly. I would then replace the lines in my mixes. Anthony was on call, preparing the placeholders, pickups and additional lines. There were a lot of sessions and it got messy quite quickly, but we tried to keep it organized. The second challenge. As I mentioned, I've already scored the episodes, but with the new narration, notes and many cuts, my cues would not fit. However, I didn't have time to rescore each episode, so there's a lot of creative editing, cutting and moving the musical cues around to make it work. At some points, the sessions looked like Swiss cheese with holes and cuts everywhere. I've no idea how I would make it work. We had 5 drafts plus final in total. Now, each had substantial notes and required cuts and changes, and I used my Google Sheets to keep track of it. Because remember, it was 15 episodes, and when working on such a long project, organization and prep are half of the success. Music was a big one. At first, we couldn't find a common language with Olivia. I sent her some cues, a few ideas for the tone, but we couldn't agree on the direction. We met in Las Vegas at the beginning of 2023 and decided that I would temp score one of the shortest episodes rather than just send her snippets of the cues. So I did that, and then we got on the same page. Now, these weren't the cues I used in the show, but it was more about the tone I was going for. And there was something else. In the beginning, Olivia asked me what I thought about constant music, a wall-to-wall score. Now, she said in the past the producers she worked with said that, that's not how it's done, that's, not how they do it. I said, that's what I do for Casefile. It's background constant wall-to-wall music, and also it's her podcast. She can do whatever she wants. And that's the beauty of podcasting. However, wall-to-wall music also has its challenges, especially in podcasts. One is that with 15 episodes, there will be a lot of it. And two, majority of it has to be non-intrusive, with background tones and occasional tunes, rather than if we are going just for sporadic cues to indicate something, then the approach changes. Now, in the end, I wrote 23 cues and created 3 versions of each. One was orchestral and intense, the second was piano and acoustic bass, which was more intimate, and 3, the ambient pads, the background stuff. Now, I used a mixture of the 3 to score each episode. The podcast needed a theme. I usually write the music first and then in the end do the main theme. At this point I know the show's vibe, and I followed the same approach for the Bakersfield Three. However, the first theme I did wasn't working for me, so ultimately I scrapped it and created a new one, which we then used. I was a little bit worried that it was too big, a little too epic, but at the same time I wanted to show the listener how big, how complex the story was, and that this was different to your usual true crime podcast. The theme is played after the intro in each episode and at the end when we play the "in the next episode" clips. I talked about the scoring already, but in a nutshell, I wrote each musical cue, then recorded it onto audio stems, then scored the episodes using these stems and recorded them onto a stereo music tracks, which I then mixed again. But there was a lot of cutting, and by the end of the show, I had to cut the stereo mixes rather than the individual tracks, because it was just too much work. For the dialogues, I used this standard EQ and compression. Olivia had a few sessions in the studio, and even though it was the same studio, the sound was always slightly different. It was also noisier on the last batch of pickups and re-records. Of the interview clips, some of them were in a rough shape, especially prison calls and the audio recorded in a courthouse. There was some recorded over the phone. We used a mixture of Isotopes RX and denoisers, but luckily for me, when I was working on the project, I also acquired a couple of AI-powered plugins for dialogue restoration. One was DX Revive from Accentize and the other was Clear from Supertone, and these tools helped me to clean the problematic clips. Love it. I also added a small amount of saturation to the overall sound to give it that vintage feel. Of course, I was adjusting the clip gain of the audio all the time, because there is only so much we can do with compression. I tried so many vocal riders in the past, but manual editing is still the way to go. I listened to the mixes on many different setups, like my No1 NDH30 headphones, my PSI A17M studio monitors, the ones behind me, as well as earbuds and so on, to make sure it sounds good for the listener. We partnered with Acast for the release and we all worked on a marketing campaign. After the artwork designed by our designer Paulina was finalized, we prepped the visuals and audio trailers to promote the show. We ran a mixture of ads on Casefile feeds, social media and YouTube, and the show was released on the 7th of November 2023. Every now and then, a project comes that challenges us. This was one of them. The workload was immense. The rewrites and changes throughout the production meant we had to stay on top of the notes and the sessions. It could quickly turn to chaos. There were moments when I didn't know how we would ever finish it, but we did. For me, it was one of the most demanding projects we did, a mountain to climb after a very, very long year. But at the same time, the most creatively rewarding work I've ever done, and I'm grateful I could take a part in it. Hopefully, you'll like it too. The Bakersfield 3 is available to listen now wherever you listen to podcasts.